sure that the live stream is on. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for coming at the end of this long day during the high-level segment. We very much appreciate your being here. We've turned our pavilion around. Their columns, in this case, in Egypt. We have the Arctic sea ice toppling on its side. That is a direct result of the IPCC Working Group 1 report, which concluded that total loss of Arctic sea ice is now inevitable. At least one summer, this multi-year ice that is such an ecosystem that is important in terms of cooling the planet, that its loss is now inevitable, most likely prior to 2050. And so we approached the sea ice community with this concept. Should we have this on its side? Should we have its toppling? And unanimously they said yes. They helped us to write this explanation as to why the toppler is on its side. We want to emphasize tonight the very great importance of the loss of this portion of global cryosphere. At the same time, we want to emphasize that we have 4 columns still standing, but if we don't act in time, they will also equally start to topple. And in many ways, many elements of this, such as tropical glaciers, for example, permafrost tracks very closely with temperature. Polar ocean acidification, frankly, is one of the least understood, least attention paid to, and most scary, because already in 2008, the oceans community came together and set 450 ppm in the atmosphere, CO2, as a critical threshold, especially for polar oceans. Given our year-on-year increase in CO2, we will reach that in 12 years. And polar ocean acidification takes anywhere from 30 to 50,000 years to buffer out completely. So that is a very irreversible impact on global cryosphere. So with that said, we have a scientific presentation now to talk a bit about the importance of Arctic sea ice in the global climate system, why the IPCC came to this conclusion. So it's my pleasure to welcome Robbie Mallett, who is almost a doctor, but I can't call him that yet officially. He was one of our early career scientist volunteers last year and a very, very eloquent speaker on the sea ice. So please, Robbie.
Thanks, Pam. Pam's really set me up there as an eloquent speaker, but I was really glad to be able to talk about this. And I'm also really glad to have people from the Arctic and from Arctic communities here to talk about the personal impacts that sea ice loss has. But I think with the brief time I have, I just wanted to underscore the really global impacts of sea ice loss, because it's at the top of the world, and it's quite hard for those of us that live in Europe and further south to think about Arctic sea ice and what it might mean for us. And it's of course really symbolic in terms of losing an environment, losing what is really a distinct place, but it's also really environmentally consequential. So the sea ice, if you look at these columns here, the sea ice actually links all of them together, in fact. So when sea ice disappears, so many really critical Earth systems respond, and they don't respond well. So we have things like ice sheets. When the Arctic sea ice retreats, it warms the local environment. So I crunched the numbers last night, and I think we're currently at about 3.6 times the global rate in terms of how quickly the Arctic has warmed compared to how fast the globe on average has warmed. So we're seeing really shocking warming in the Arctic to all these systems. So the permafrost in the Arctic, particularly around Alaska, that's eroding at a really higher rate just because the sea ice is declining and it's leaving open water. It's leaving a longer distance for the wind to pick up, and it's really devastating for some of the local communities there. But also we know that when permafrost decays, it can release methane and it can release these climate warming gases. And there's another one hiding behind the back. It's the polar oceans one as well. So just in literally the last 2 months, there's been some really impactful research on ocean acidification. And as sea ice peels back and exposes that Arctic Ocean, it peels back and it exposes the ocean to the atmosphere and to the increased carbon dioxide that we're pumping into it year on year. And as it does that, we're acidifying the Arctic Ocean. And it's actually one of the fastest acidifying regions on Earth. So although Arctic sea ice lives at the top of the world and it lives out of sight of a lot of us on a global scale, it's really, really important, no matter where you live, to think about what the implications are of going beyond 1.5, because that is the message from COP. So I was listening to Antonio Guterres this morning, and he was saying the window of opportunity is closing, and there's a narrow beam of light that's left for us to slip through this narrowing window. And that was a great metaphor for global climate change, but it was also a great metaphor for sea ice, I thought. Because that narrowing window of opportunity, that narrowing beam of light, that's all we have left for sea ice. It's declining year on year. It's declining about the area of Ireland every year. We're losing 70,000 square kilometers on average every year since the satellite record began. So we need to take radical action as the window of opportunity remains open. And that window of opportunity is 1.5. It's not 2. So a lot of people out there are thinking, if we pass 1.5, we'll hit 2 as a backup. We'll get 2 degrees, but no, the next backup has got to be 1.51 if we miss 1.5. So that's a really important message for me, certainly. I just wanted to touch on also the multi-year ice that we're seeing, because that's what we're really looking at. As we lose summer sea ice, we lose the ability of sea ice to hold through the summer. And as it disappears, we lose this thick, rough, quite thick snow-covered ice. And I don't want to get too technical, but this is a distinct type of ice that we're losing. It's an environment that we're losing from the Earth, in fact. And that multi-year ice, it's really important for the Arctic ecosystem. It's important for things like ringed seals who den in the snow. But it's also important as it blocks light very, very effectively. And if you're a tiny algae, a phytoplankton, it's really, really important that we don't peel back that sea ice cover, that multi-year ice, and stress that ecosystem and disrupt that ecosystem. And of course, as we every summer we remove the sea ice more and more, it grows less and less in the winter as we warm the Arctic at 3.6 times the global rate. And that sea ice thinning is also really important. So 20 years ago, if you ask sea ice scientists what's going on with sea ice, they'll tell you where it is and where it's not. But we're slowly improving our understanding of sea ice So that now we're thinking about the sea ice thickness, we're thinking about the sea ice age, we're thinking about a whole suite of variables, and none of these variables are positive. None of these variables are showing, none of these variables are giving us confidence, basically. So the sea ice thickness, we're particularly worried about the areas around the peripheral Arctic, what we often call the Arctic marginal seas. And that's very political as well. So as we thin that ice, it opens the Arctic up to exploration and for minerals, for fishing, for oil and gas drilling. And as we increasingly use the Arctic, as we thin that Arctic sea ice cover, we're exposing it to pollution, we're exposing it to the risk of oil spills, but we're also exposing it to the emissions of all the ships that are going to be using it. So it's a multifaceted environmental issue that we're having to deal with here. And we really need to think radically, both in terms of our emissions, but also in terms of our governance of the Arctic, about how we handle that. There is some good news, though, that thin beam of light that I want to keep going back to. The reason that the Arctic is declining so quickly is because it responds so quickly to our carbon emissions. And because it responds so quickly to our carbon emissions, if we stop emitting, the sea ice will stop shrinking. So it's a rapid responder, but it's also that's a curse, but it's also a blessing, and that means that there's no sea ice loss baked in. So if we stop, the sea ice decrease will stop, and because we've committed to some emissions, we have this toppled tubular, because we can't stop emitting tomorrow, but we do have the power. If we cut emissions, it will stop Arctic sea ice decline, and I think we have to be really clear on that, because it can be confusing. So in terms of land ice, sea level rise, there's a lot of baked in science. There's a lot of things that we've committed to for millennia. But the sea ice, it can be a hopeful story as well as a distressing story. And the result of that is that it's also reversible. So if we do overshoot by a small amount and then remove carbon dioxide, we can reverse the loss of summer Arctic sea ice. So if we act quickly, the science is positive that we can reverse this incredible damage that we're doing to the environment. And that reversibility, it's not a pipe dream either. So we can actually cut our emissions, and I want to be really clear about that as well, that it's physically possible, and we're choosing not to. And we need to be honest with ourselves that we're not victims of our environment here. We're victims of our political and economic choices. I think that's mostly what I have to say about sea ice, and I know we'll do a little question and answer session later if anyone has any more technical questions. But I just wanted to thank you all for being here again, because it's really important that the cryosphere, and particularly the Arctic, that's not property of any one country. It's really important that it gets the attention that it deserves from policymakers, from activists, from scientists. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Robbie. That was great, and I didn't set you up at all. That was fantastic. And I would encourage people also to, look at this afterwards. But you can see with, low and very low emissions on the graph, we get some stabilization of Arctic summer sea ice above total loss. At about 1.7 degrees, that's when the science says we will not have Arctic summer sea ice more often than not. And then as you go higher, you lose it ever more often. By 2 degrees, the Arctic would be ice-free pretty much every year between July and October. And then the ocean starts to warm. And then that reversibility that Robbie was talking about will begin to disappear. That's why it's so urgent. It's my great pleasure right now to introduce the president of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Lisa Hopequaluk, who we are incredibly pleased to have her to talk about the impact of this loss, this inevitable loss of Arctic sea ice on the indigenous peoples of the Arctic, and especially the Inuit peoples. Lisa, please.
Nakormik, Tungasuitsi, be welcome here. Uhalangama, Alepunga, Tamanik kasi ilun nasi. I'm pleased to be here to share some of our knowledge. I'm bringing in the human aspect, the Indigenous perspective here. And I'd first like to speak to Sila, which is the exterior, the great outside, or the universe, or the weather. When an Inuk like me, or some of my fellow Inuit here, are growing up, as they are children, they are silaituk. They don't have much sila. They don't have much wisdom because they are children and they're just learning. But as you grow older and you learn to control yourself, to be respectful of others, to be respectful to the environment, you become full of sila. You become full of the exterior. And that's what wisdom means for us in our language. Silatuyuk, you are full of the outside because you have learned a lot from your exterior. Yes. So the I'm bringing in a little bit of the silatunik, the wisdom of my ancestors here when I speak to Indigenous knowledge. And we are 180,000 Inuit around the circumpolar region. So we are dispersed in 4 different countries, in Chukotka, which is part of Russia, in Alaska, the United States, in Canada, and in Greenland, which is associated with Denmark. And Inuit Circumpolar Council unifies the voice of the Inuit in the circumpolar region. And it has existed since 1977 and advocates for the inherent right of self-determination of Inuit. It worked for a very long time and helped to draft the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So that's a quick background on Inuit Circumpolar Council. We are a marine people, and our way of life, our culture, is inextricably tied to Arctic ecosystem. And so when we say that it's inextricably tied, our culture, to the Arctic ecosystem, what do we mean when we say that? We mean that we chose the Arctic, we chose to live in the Arctic, and we migrated across the Arctic all the way from Alaska to Greenland, and we formed our culture based on the Arctic ecosystem. We created snow houses out of our own innovative capacity, creativity. We created the kayak. We have the seal oil lamp we depended on to light our snow houses in the Arctic and to warm them enough so that we are comfortable in a snow house. Our knowledge holder, Pita Ilnik, was born in a snow house, in an igloo. Yes, an igloo today for us means a house where we live. It can be a wooden house now, today. But so speaking to our knowledge system, it has been created over many, many generations and shared from generation to generation. And it's a knowledge system that is living and dynamic and ever changing. So our culture is also ever changing, and so is our knowledge. So it's a living knowledge system that I don't say is traditional. Sometimes when we say traditional, often we think that that's from way back and it's just, it's still the same from that long ago, but it's not. It's indigenous knowledge, as I call it. So this knowledge that we have in the Arctic includes knowledge of the ocean, the seas, the sea ice, the marine ecosystem, migration patterns of marine mammals, current and wind observations, knowledge of the ice movements as well. So that knowledge through observation has been held by Inuit for a very, very long time. However, this knowledge is being impacted by climate change. Inuit Nunat, our circumpolar homeland, is warming 3 to 4 times faster than other parts of the world. And climate change is happening not caused by our own region, our own people, but coming from the exterior. And yet we are experiencing climate change a lot more than those who are causing it. So climate change is causing ice to reduce, to diminish in the Arctic, and that brings more development, and shipping traffic increases due to that. Shipping traffic is risks of collisions, pollution, more pollution, risk of oil spills in our waters, for which we are not prepared. So there's a lot of uncertainty because of all these changes that are happening to the Arctic environment. There's an Arctic Council report that looked at ship traffic. To give you some statistics, there's a 75% increase in distance sailed and 25% increase in ships, in unique ships coming into the Arctic more. So new ships are coming to the Arctic for resource development and for tourism. They're also looking for shorter and newer routes. So that's one of the impacts. Black carbon is also introduced by ships. Black carbon is a climate forcer. So when it deposits onto snow and ice and glaciers, it really accelerates the melting of ice. So climate change is also creating severe weather events. And we would hear those types of screamings if we were experiencing the terrible hurricane that our Inuit family experienced this past summer in the west coastline of Alaska. And housing was damaged. Coastlines were damaged. Now, Inuit communities are already experiencing coastal erosion, but this severe hurricane was just way above what they normally experience in terms of hurricanes. Hurricanes come in seasons, but this one was really extreme. So we've been predicting for a very long time at ICC. Our leaders have participated at the COPs for decades now and have been saying this all along. There's worse yet to come. There is now, and it's happening now. Climate change is a reality and it's impacting our culture. If sea ice disappears, it impacts our culture. Aspects of our culture that we transmit to generations are going to be lost. And that's also directly related to our language, Inuktitut. Ice is siku. And there are many forms of ice as well. In our language, there's different types of ice, as there are different types of snow. So the cultural transmission will be impacted. if snow and ice disappear. And hopefully it will not disappear, but it's absolutely necessary to protect our environment, our Arctic ecosystem. Ice plays such a vital role for the whole globe in regulating temperature of the globe. Those living in near the equator may not think that ice is important to the globe, but it's really related. All is related. The ocean is a global ocean. Sila, the exterior, is global, and we need to protect it. We need to take action now. Thank you very much. Nakomig.
Thank you so much. And that is a wonderful segue into our next speakers who understand very well as early career scientists what this connection is. We're very lucky to have them as volunteers actually at the Cryosphere Pavilion. And both of them have this dual connection, both personally as well as in their research. Arthi Ramachandran is working for Natural Resources Canada, is also from India. Bimo Nuraula we have him down in our list, is from Nepal, Canada, and now working at AVI in Germany. And they're here to speak a little bit about this connection between the Arctic and the equator, about other parts of the world. So please.
Thanks, Pam. So as Pam already mentioned, I grew up in Nepal and I have seen firsthand the effects of climate change in the Himalayas. But then I moved to Canada and now I'm working in the field of sea ice. So I have both seen how quickly we're losing sea ice in the Arctic, how the ice extent is decreasing year by year, and how much effect it's having in the atmosphere, in the ocean, to albedo feedback. As Robbie has already mentioned, it is a very multifaceted issue. So I just want to end by saying that one of the totems has fallen, but the other totems are still standing. And who knows, if we take enough action together, maybe this totem can go back up again. That's it.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful talk, Kwana. I only know how to say that in Inuit. So yeah, like Pam said, my family is from India. I was born and raised in Canada. I've done Arctic research. I've been to the Arctic. I've seen firsthand what loss of sea ice means to the communities there. I've been able to experience that. But at the same time, like Lisa said, like Bimo said, everything's interconnected. Change is interconnected. What happens in the Arctic also affects everyone globally. My family living in India on the coast in Chennai are experiencing some of the effects that we see in the Arctic: loss of sea ice, loss of permafrost. All of these things are affecting everyone globally. They're seeing changes in sea levels. They're seeing drastic weather patterns shifting, monsoon seasons changing, dry seasons changing, and so everything goes together. And so we need to think about this globally, not just as different regions. We are all interconnected, and I think here at COP, hopefully we can make that connection, and that moving forward we can come to global changes together and reach this 1.5 degrees and not go further. And I think that that's really important, that we're all in this together. It's not everyone for themselves. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much to both of you. So that includes kind of the spoken portion of this. And we thought it would be a good way to end this, in a sense, ceremony, this recognition. With a musical piece. We were lucky enough, and those of you who were here earlier might have had the joy of watching Simon Peterman and his colleagues give a very multifaceted event that had painting, that had graphic art, and this beautiful music that was meant to represent in many ways what is happening to the world's ice. So we're very appreciative that Simon could stay on to end this event with his interpretation of what we're facing. Did you want to say a few words about what you're going to play, or just give it? Yeah, I think the music speaks for itself. So thank you. And of course, of Switzerland, where 6% of the glaciers were lost. And some of that probably from Arctic amplification, the warming of the Northern Hemisphere. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much, Simon. That was beautiful. It's a perfect way to end this. although hopefully it is not the end of Arctic summer multi-year sea ice. And that will be up to us. So many of us will stay here to answer questions and for discussion, and we look forward to further dialogue during this week. If anyone actually wants a paper copy of this report, please let one of us working at the pavilion know. Otherwise, the QR codes are now working, and so you can download it directly. Thank you so much for coming. Good night.